whether or not they have, and the fact that Eric lost that big PLO pot. Oh, he goes all in. Whoa, I love this. Oh my gosh, what a play by Eric.
He's not folded yet. This is a long time. He's in the tank. Look at me. I got to take my jacket off. I'm excited. I think Rory might make this call. He said I can beat a set. He's talking out loud.
And Alex eating ice cream in the background.
Chips are back on the stack. Folds. Yep.
Wow, what a play by Eric. That was amazing. Great play to Eric there. And you could see why he's a stream regular. So good. I really like that play. If he goes like 700, 800, it's a lot easier to call, but all in, so powerful, so demanding, so hard to find bluffs there in that spot. But he finds it.
Yeah, how did you get that one through against Rory?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a good spot to bluff because it's a normally under bluffed line, and a lot of people overfold there on the river. All right, moving on to the next hand. I'm in the $10 straddle, folds to Bruno on the button. He opens, and I defend my button. We are playing the stand-up game, and me, Bruno, and one other person are the last three standing. And on the flop of King 10-4 with two spades, I think this is a pretty clear check call spot. I don't think there's any real reason to raise. It'd be a bit of an overplay. Turn ace, not loving that at all. But he does check it back, which makes me feel pretty good. I don't think he's really going to be trapping too often, especially since we're playing the stand-up game. River's a third spade, which I really don't like either. But I go for a small sizing, just looking to get called by a worse king or even a 10. And obviously folding to a raise. And he snap pays me with a 10. I show and he mucks.
Yeah, it looks like they're doing some straddles here. So got some big straddles already.
All right, this next hand happened a while after the previous one because, as you can see, we're playing a new stand-up game. I got my little horsey in front of me. There's a $40 straddle, and I open up Queen 9 suited in the cutoff to $120.
Blinds are definitely just a suggestion here in Texas.
It folds all the way around to Rory, who defends the 20 with the King 3 suited.
Sean. 115 to call.
Yeah,
He's doing too well.
I don't blame the fold.
I don't blame the fold either. What I mean is that he's running well.
Yeah.
And Alex is going to
marginal to be a trouble hand.
get out of the way here. So we go heads up to a flop.
No, I definitely with this straddle.
You can see it's a bit of a tough decision here. Given the stand-up game, he's taking a while, but eventually just lets go of the 9-8 suit, 9-8 offsuit. About 300 in the pot, heads up in position. And the flop comes Queen 6-3 with a couple of clubs. I briefly considered checking back, but I think given the stand-up game, I'm going to get called way lighter than normal, and I think this is a hand that can play decently well against a raise. Given that whole dynamic with the stand-up game, I'm going to get raised by a lot weaker hands than in a normal pot. So I bet 100, and he snap calls, turns another 6, which I don't really care for. I think it's a little thin to go for two streets here, and it'd be a nice hand to trap as well in the stand-up game. Catch some bluffs on the river. So I check behind. River's a king of clubs. Pretty bad card, I think. But he does end up checking it to me. And I just think that I have the best hand here when he checks for a third time. I don't think I'm going to get him off a queen, but I do target like under pairs I do have a lot of bluffs on this river in the stand-up, given the stand-up game dynamic. Unfortunately, he snap calls with his rivered king, and I'm pretty pissed about that. Yeah, in hindsight, I think this is a little thin with the clubs completing on the end and my kicker not playing. But, you know, I don't think it's a huge mistake either. All right, this next hand, we have a $20 straddle, plus 3 limps, and I overlimp with pocket 3s in the hijack.
Yeah, I'm surprised we don't see more limping in these games. Now we do, but
Button also calls,
a product of players like Rory.
And it folds around to the big blind, or no, it's the first straddle, who makes the call as well. Second straddle folds, and Rory checks his option, and we go 5 ways to a flop with pocket 3s. Flop is 8-5-5 with a couple of diamonds. Honestly, like, not the worst board for pocket 3s, even though I don't flop a set. So when it checks to me, I actually think I have the best hand, and I think it's worth denying some equity here. So I bet small. I bet about half. No, I actually bet big. I bet half pot, and get raised on immediately by the button. And now I don't think. I think you can definitely have some like value hands, but I just got the sense that he was very bluff heavy in this spot, given how weak my overlimp looks, combined with the fact that everybody else checked, and it could just be like I was stabbing or betting small for protection. And this is definitely a board where there's a lot of draws present in the button's limping range. So I make the call for 200. The turn is a total brick. It's a deuce of hearts. I check, and he continues for not that big of a size. He only goes, let's see, like 275, it looks like. 225. Yeah, it's not even half pot. Like, I just did not think that he'd bet so small with a value hand, given how my hand looks decently strong. And there's a lot of hands with high equity that I could continue with, like flush draws 8x, that are going to call a bigger bet. So I just thought he was up to something here, and he's definitely capable of pulling some tricky moves, as we can see. River's a jack. In my mind, this is a brick. I mean, if he has jack X of diamonds, that's fine. But he does take a super small sizing. And that ruled out jack X of diamonds in my mind. He goes only 150 into a pot of 960. And, it's a little bit of a weird bet, so I take a few seconds to think about it. But, there's just no way I can fold for this against this sizing. I know he's capable of bluffing for this sizing. Like, there are players who are definitely not capable of bluffing for this sizing. But he is. So I just decided to put in the psi call, and I end up winning.
But he was talking a lot.
Yeah, he was saying, what if I had Jack 10 of diamonds? Would that be good? And Eric says, yeah, but you don't have that. And John said, yeah, I don't.
All right, next up, there's I believe a $5 straddle. Button opens to 20, and I make a bit of a questionable call with the deuces, but I don't really think I'm going to get squeezed by the players behind very often, so I just want to call and flop a set because we're super deep. And the straddle also comes along, so we go 3 ways to a flop out of position with deuces. And a flop comes ace-7-8, 2 diamonds, so really bad flop. Obviously checking with plans to fold, but it checks all the way around, which I find a little interesting. I would expect any strong value hands to definitely bet this flop. Turns to 10. And I check, and the straddle checks again, so it makes me think he really doesn't have a strong hand, especially having played with him for several streams.
I got Choctaw in the morning.
And button bets 40, which seems like it's a bigger sizing. It just feels like a bluff because, as I mentioned previously, I would expect his stronger value hands to bet this flop because of all the draws that he can get value from. Straddle comes along as well. And the river's another ace, which I find very interesting because it further reduces the number of ace-x combos and the likelihood that Straddle was slow playing on the flop and turn. And when the button bets huge, he overbets when we finally check to him. I just really don't believe this at all. I just think he has like a lot of bluffs here. Like it's that what I'm trying to say is like value hands just don't take this size. And especially after they don't bet the flop. So I end up making like a super speculative call. And even with the player behind, I just thought that my call would get him to fold. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And when he calls, I tell him like, yeah, you definitely have me beat. I was not expecting you to call. And yeah, that was a very interesting hand.
Very ambitious with that call, and maybe you can make that call heads up, but with a player behind.
But it was an immediate.
Yeah, then Eric's like, oh wait, I have showdown.
All right, the penultimate hand of this episode. Straddle to 10, second to act limps, and Bruno makes it 35 with here in the hijack.
You know what? And I got some beef with Rami. All right.
Okay.
This dude comes
I'm in the small blind, and I decide to get in there with Jack 8 suited. Not advisable. I don't know how to defend this play at all. I think I was like 4 drinks in, so that's got to be the reason.
I got beef with Rami.
Probably would play this on the button. Maybe I thought I was the button. Yeah, I mean, like, in position, there's some reason to get in there. But yeah, in the small blind is just a bad idea. But I flop a gut shot with 1 over and backdoor diamonds. So not the worst flop in the world. I check. The big blind checks. I forgot to mention we went 5 ways to a flop, but you can see it on your screen. And the straddle donk leads for 75, which is like 40% pot. And I find that very odd. You shouldn't really be doing that, especially when the initial raiser was like a player that had been like definitely on the tighter side. So I make a pretty speculative call with a decent amount of equity and potential to bluff on later streets. I just didn't think he would do this with a very strong hand. So I thought he was actually capped here. But the big blind comes along, which scares me a bit. I do turn top pair, which is nice. I check in flow, and it checks all the way around. River's a bad card. It's a king. And it's just more overcards. I mean, none of them should really have too many king X here, although there are some 2 pair combinations like king 7, king 9 that are possibilities. But I mean, I'm out of position and with only second pair against 2 players, so it's definitely a check here. And the big blind goes for a big bet. He bets 300. And the initial better folds, and I just don't really like this at all. Robert hasn't gotten too far out of line from what I've seen, so it just seems pretty value heavy for sure. He's betting like my hand looks like at least somewhat strong, and the initial raiser at least has some showdown value. So the fact that he's betting into both of us feels like he definitely has a value. He's definitely weighted toward value here. Hard to imagine too many bluffs in this spot as well. like because a lot of the speculative like draw type hands on the flop have showdown value with the jack. And I block a lot of those bluffs as well with the 8 in my hand, so I just decided to let it go. And moving on to the final hand of this episode, not the final hand of the stream, but we were getting close to it at this point. You can see there's a black chip in front of John, and that's because he's in the $100 straddle. And I think it went 1, 2, 10, 25, 50, 100, and I was in the $25 straddle, if I remember correctly. So it folds all the way to Alex in the $10 straddle, and he bumps it up to 350. And I wake up with aces in the $25 straddle, and I think in like a tournament situation, I'd probably rip it here, but it's a weird dynamic in a cash game with like such a large amount of money, like raw dollars. So I feel like I would just not get called very often if I ripped it, even though it's only 20 big blinds. So I decided to smooth call, and we go to a flop with an SPR barely 2. And I just flop top set on a board with 2 hearts. And I am surprised to see Alex bet for 500, which is a very large sizing, especially considering the SPR. I mean, it makes sense in hindsight, like why, like this is a type of flop that you could definitely go for a large sizing because the initial raiser has such a range advantage, and there is a good amount of draws out there. But you know, I'm sitting there with top set, trying to figure out what the hell he has. I count out my stack. I consider just jamming it in on the flop, but you know, I just decide that, like, you know, even if the turn's a heart, I'm not folding, like, obviously. So I end up just making the smooth call. And I have, you know, just want to keep his bluffs in, especially considering I so heavily block the value range. I mean, 3 aces are accounted for. He would have to have the last ace in the deck, which he unfortunately does, but I don't know that at this point. Turns a brick, it's an 8. He snap shoves, I snap call.
Well, I lost $5. Yeah, that's $5.
And he is drawing dead.
$5 richer, and a
jack on the river just to rub it in, and a nice double up close to the end of the stream. Kind of saves my night, really.
Hell
Me
yeah.
and Alex both got stacked this hand.
5 bones.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Ethan, say goodnight.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks again for Chaz. I'm
Chaz.
Ethan Bruin here with Rudy Herrera
Thanks for
and
popping
Big
in.
Daddy Chaz. All right, have a good night,
Good
y'all.
night.
Yo.